Hello everybody, excuse any mess you may see to the sides of the screen. I'm currently in the process of re-studioing, or moving my studio to a different part of the house. But in the meantime, I actually have a video for you today, and none of the boys are here. Knickknack's not joining me, neither is Realm or Vorn, although I did have a lot of Knickknack's input when designing this video and making my list. So I'm sure, as you can see on screen, I've got a pile of manga here, and it doesn't look very big to you, but that's because you can only see the top couple books. There's about 15 books in this pile. They're all manga. And the conversation that I have recently gotten into with a few different people in my life, including the person that I run another podcast with on a different channel, is one involving getting into manga, or what are really good series to read and not watch. And I want to put a disclaimer here. First of all, most of these have amazing animes, and I totally recommend the anime and any drama adaptations of them, as well as the manga. Second of all, while I have a lot of the paper copies, and I do have the manga shelf, it isn't economically affordable in the US to buy every single manga you're reading very often, and some of the ones that I will be suggesting are pretty much out of print, and they're really hard to find. So for some of these manga, I will be telling you that, I read them by going online and finding fan translations and things like that. But every manga I mentioned in this video should be relatively easy to find, either in paper, used, or in website format. I even rented a few from the library when I was first getting into manga. Alright, so the other thing that I have to put a disclaimer on is this video is not without bias. While I think it's a pretty good guide for what you could read if you were just starting to get into manga, or if you're just looking to read some new things that I think are really good, there is bias in this list, and it is of course including manga series that I have read and I enjoy. Which means that there's definitely going to be series that I don't mention because I either haven't read them or I don't enjoy them. And that doesn't mean that they're bad, it just means that they're not my taste, and I'm not including them. And I will be doing some more in-depth and nuanced videos, probably in the future, about each individual genre and a lot of different manga you can read in each. But for now, this video is going to be relatively short as I can make it. Knickknack really helped me cull my lists down, but I snuck a few manga back onto them when I was doing the final revisions for my lists, because honestly, I just couldn't let some of them go. So with that being said, we'll start out with one of our bigger categories, which is shoujo. And for those of you who are into manga and anime, you probably know that shoujo is the name of the demographic that targets girls ages 10 to 18, and is typically categorized by rom-coms, a lot of feel-good shows, things with female protagonists, and just generally things that are seen as more traditionally feminine in the Western perspective, as well as the Japanese perspective, hence why it's called shoujo. So because of this, shoujo doesn't necessarily cover a single genre like fantasy or fiction or sci-fi. It's just kind of a general vibe instead of tropes that you often find. But luckily, I do have copies of most of the shoujo books I'm going to recommend you, and if I don't have a copy, well, it's going to be in that upper corner, which is also where I'm going to put pictures of the books that I hold up, since I'm not going to be blocking my face to give you close-ups on the camera of the books. So we're going to start off with 4 shoujos that I really enjoy, and are all pretty old, and I believe only 2 of them are being currently published in the US, and one of them may not be in publication anymore since its run has finished. So the first one is Hanakimi, or Hanazakari no Kimitachi for You in Full Bloom, which is a manga about a girl who really idolizes this one high jumper, and she decides to enter an all-boys school dressed as a boy to get to know him and kind of persuade him back into high jump because he's given it up. And it's really just a wacky series with a ton of comedy, a romantic plot running through it, and some really funny shenanigans involving gender and a couple of the characters kind of coming to terms with realizations about themselves, which is really fun. This particular series does not have an anime, however, it does have 3 or 4 different Asian drama adaptations, at least 2 Japanese, 1 Korean, and I believe a Taiwanese. I'm personally partial to the original Japanese adaptation with Shun Ogiri, but honestly, they're all pretty good. And the Korean one's pretty famous because it stars Minho from SHINee and Amber from FX, and it was produced by their music company, SM Town. The second is The Wallflower, or Yamato Nadeshiko Shichi Henjei, which is also called Perfect Girl Evolution. So this one has a lot of names. I didn't know it was originally called The Wallflower till I found some of the English copies of the books. This is one that's out of print in the US and is not currently being released. Any copies I have are copies that I found used for pretty cheap. However, I did read the entire series online when I was younger. It's about 4 boys that are told that they can live in this beautiful mansion while going to high school for really, really cheap, so long as they turn the mansion owner's niece into a perfect girl, or a Yamato Nadeshiko, which is kind of a Japanese catch-all for like the beautiful, cultured woman to Japanese standards. And once again, hijinks, shenanigans, romance ensues. This one does have a little bit of kind of inbuilt gender stereotypes and roles, but the main character is really awesome, and I think she's just a pleasure to read about. This does have an anime. The anime does not cover the entire run of the manga, and the anime is not really viewed very well by a lot of people who've seen it, so watch at your own risk. The next is Fruits Basket, which a lot of you will know, as I hold the book up backwards. I do not have the individual volumes of Fruits Basket. I think I have 2 or 3 that I bought used, but Fruits Basket in individual volumes is no longer published in English. These are the collector's edition, which are 3-in-1 books and are sold at Barnes & Nobles. They're a little bit bigger than your normal size manga, both in stature and in thickness, much like me. Fruits Basket's pretty well known. It had an original anime back in between 2001 and 2003, I'm not sure exactly the year, that caught up to the manga being published in Japan, and then it had a non-canon ending, and it ended at around a season and a half or so episodes. It had recently got a new anime that redoes the animation style and art of the first, 20 or so episodes before the storyline changed, and then finishes it out according to the way that the manga finished. I highly recommend that, and honestly, I kind of don't want to spoil that one or describe it too much because it's really popular. A lot of you might have already heard of it or seen it, and if you don't, it's kind of a wild story, so you should definitely do it. The next is Boys Over Flowers, or Hanayori Dango. So this has a very old anime. I think it's 90s, I believe. It's very similar to the art style of Sailor Moon, which is a very old and traditional shoujo style with over-exaggerated eyes and very feminine features on a lot of the characters. It also has a lot of Asian dramas. So there is a Japanese drama called Hanayori Dango, which had 2 seasons and a movie. There is a Korean version of this, not under the same name. But whenever I tell the boys about it, I always just tell them F4, 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 which is the name of the gang of rich boys in the rich school that this character ends up going to. She herself is not rich. She actually gets into it for some other reason. It actually changes depending on the version you're watching in terms of the drama, which is interesting. But she ends up going to this rich kid's school, private school, and there's these 4 boys that are basically ultra mega rich, and they kind of rule the school with an iron fist of terror. It's not always the best. Now, I don't have a physical copy of the first book of the next series, which is Ancient Magus Bride, and honestly, there's not much I can say about it without spoiling a whole lot of it, other than it is an amazing read with beautiful art, and the author's also done a couple other really good series, and I highly recommend Ancient Magus Bride. It also has an amazing anime. God damn it, always the wrong corner. So the next is I Hear the Sunspot, which is a book. once again, backwards. I'm not good at this, if you can tell. This one I picked up recently. It's a deaf romance. It's also LGBTQ. It's a gay romance. And it's about these two boys, one who has a hearing impediment and one other boy who signs up to be his aide, though he's not very good at it. And honestly, there's not a whole lot of romance in the first volume, which I've read so far, but the character development is really beautiful, and the way that they treat the story and talk about both characters and the way that we can hear their thoughts through the manga is really stunning. And so I think it's an amazing read, especially with so many more mainstream manga now being released that are in the LGBTQ space. I think it's important. My next is My Androgynous Boyfriend. This is another recent buy for me. Very biased pick. I do think it's a really good book with amazing messages about self-esteem and loving yourself. The art is stunning, and I think it's the cutest storyline ever. Honestly, it could be read as a one-shot, but it is a series, and I definitely highly recommend this one. It's about a girl and her boyfriend. She works an office job, her boyfriend is a model, and he loves making himself beautiful for her. And it is just stunningly well done. My next one is a personal favorite of mine. I did make all the rest of the boys from the club read this, so you may see an episode going up about this book specifically in the Off the Shelf series, maybe with Realm or Vorn if I can get them to agree, but it's I Married My Best Friend to Shut My Parents Up. This is a one-shot, and it's a short book about these two girls who get married because one of them, her parents have been bugging her to get married, and the other one proposes it to her as if, let's live together, let's get the benefits of being married, and romance blossoms from there, and it's super sweet. Now, moving out of shoujo, I think the next thing I want to talk about is fantasy. And this was one of my bigger categories that I then had to cut down significantly, and I don't have copies of all of the books in paper because some of them I've never found copies of in paper. So we'll start with the two I do have. Frieren is a really new series. A couple other videos have already gone up on the channel, but there's recently Isekai has been very popular and fantasy manga have been really popular. And this story is called Beyond Journey's End. And it's specifically about a group of fantasy adventurers who take on a quest to save the world, defeat the Demon King. But what happens after? The party was made up of two humans, a dwarf and an elf, and obviously dwarven and elven lifespans are much longer than humans. The titular character, Frieren, is the elf of the party, and the story starts after the Demon Lord has been defeated with what Frieren does afterwards, and it is almost heartbreaking in the first book, but the writing is amazing. There's twists like you wouldn't believe. I'm on book 3, and the ending of book 2 shocked me so much that I had to reread the entire last chapter to make sure that I got it correct. It was absolutely stunning. Now, one of the reasons why this section is going to be really short, even though I do have some more books that would have gone in it, is this is where the biggest massacre in my list occurred from Nick Knack. Since this is a video about manga that you get into, he pointed out, and rightfully so, that I should not recommend you any light novels or light novel originals because that can be made into its own video. And unfortunately, most of the isekai that I was going to recommend, and even a few of the fantasies I was going to recommend, started their life as web novels or web comics, and therefore didn't warrant this list of manga exclusives. So if you don't see an isekai or a fantasy you like, it's probably because if I've read it, it was originally a web novel, and I felt that I should give attention to manga in this video. So moving on from Frieren, we're going to talk about two that I have never managed to get paper copies of. One is Shikoku no Altair, or Record of Altair, which is a historical fantasy about the Ottoman Empire. And honestly, it's stunning. The anime is on Amazon Prime, and the manga is beautiful. The art is out of this world. I mean, it's fantasy, obviously, but the author really managed to capture this Ottoman Empire kind of Persian and Turkish aesthetic, really beautifully, like the pashas of old and sultans and that kind of thing. And the story itself is a politically driven piece, obviously, with really amazing writing. The characters are very well fleshed out. They make logical decisions. It's really fun to follow, and it will surprise you a few times. The next thing I want to talk about is One Half Prince. This is my exception to Knickknack's rule. I snuck this one in without telling him. So this is, first of all, it's originally Chinese. So it was called One Half Wang Zi, or One Half Prince. Secondly, it was originally a web novel, but it was published into Japanese as a manga before it was published as a web novel. And it is super easy to find online. It is 76 chapters, and it's basically Sword Art Online, if Sword Art Online was as good as it was during the first arc, and then keeps being good. It's MMO mixed with Isekai. You've got the trapped in an MMO because somebody's fucking with the game. 10 out of 10. Highly recommend. So next is Itsuwaribito. There's going to be a different image up in that corner because I actually gave my first 4 volumes away as a gift to one of my friends. So I only have 5, 6, and 7 left on my shelves, and I am looking to replace them at some point, but I don't want to buy them new because I've already purchased copies new of those. Now, Itsuwaribito is, it's a little bit about an anti-hero almost. So this is the first one where the main character isn't necessarily entirely good. He's really morally gray. He likes to get out of situations and trouble and help people, but he does it by lying. He does it by deliberately not telling the truth. He gets into battles of lies with other people. Often to the death. It is a bit gruesome. It is a bit gory. But I genuinely enjoy it. And it is chock full of Japanese mythology and folklore. And the main character's animal companion is a little tanuki demon. Super cute. The last one in this category is Rave Master. And I was really considering including maybe Eden Zero in like a separate sci-fi list or talking about Fairy Tail because I adore Fairy Tail. I think Fairy Tail is really fun to read. But Fairy Tail is also kind of one of the big 5 from the early 2000s. Almost everyone's heard of it. A lot of people have read it and seen it. It has so many spin-offs and it's such a long series. And it's not Hiro Mashima's only series, and honestly, Rave Master is his earlier series. Elements of Rave Master are incorporated into Fairy Tail. And I personally think Rave Master is really good. You should definitely check it out. You'll have to read it online. It's no longer published in the US in English, and the copies are really expensive if you want to try to buy them, but it's definitely a book that you should check out reading online. I think it has 35 volumes or so, so it's a really long series. But it's really fun and very fantasy. So the third category that I wanted to talk about is sports anime and manga. And I think the obvious addendum here is that sports anime are, depending on the sport, gonna be a lot more interesting to watch than they are to read. This is because often sports involve a lot of dynamic action, so they're gonna be more interesting in a visual format than in a written format. But if you're down to sit through reading about sports, which not a lot of people are, I get that, and I'm not typically one either, but I do have 2 or 3 recommendations in this category. So the first is a comedic sports recommendation, and it's How Heavy Are the Dumbbells You Lift, which is just absolutely hilarious. It's a weightlifting anime and manga, and honestly, the gags, the comedy is through the roof. It's not that long. You can blaze through it pretty fast. It's really funny. Which leads us to my other 2 recommendations. One is Haikyuu, which doesn't need a lot of explanation. It's still really popular right now. That's the volleyball one, of course. The art style is beautiful, even in the manga. And Haikyuu is a very character-driven piece. So the manga deals a lot with the characters themselves, meaning that it's not that bad to read it because you're not just reading repeated scenes of volleyball again and again and again like you would in some sports manga. So highly recommend Haikyuu to read and to watch. The third is perhaps the most contentious and my most biased submission possibly in this entire video, but it's Prince of Tennis. I adore Prince of Tennis. I think it's really fun to read because I consider it to be a character piece, getting to know all the members of the main team that you're following and all of the other teams, and then getting to see them struggle to improve themselves and one another, learn how to work together, and just go through everyday life while also being a part of this tennis club and achieving amazing heights in the tennis community inside the book series. This is a pretty long series. It's 44 volumes. It also has a secondary series and some continuations. It is no longer published in English in the US. However, I actually read the entire series by ordering it from my local library in batches of like 20 books at a time. That's how I read it. I acquired copies of about the first 20 books used, and honestly, I love the art style at this point, but that might be Stockholm Syndrome talking, because this is one of my favorite mangas and anime ever. Highly recommend. Prince of Tennis, 10 out of 10. So next on my agenda is comedy. Now, I don't actually keep a copy of any of these except for one because they are pretty hard to find in the US. Most of these series are shorter, and shorter series don't get published as often into the US, or they're just not as popular because purely comedy shows, or mangas, purely comedy mangas, generally don't hit it as big as like a Shounen or a Shoujo. I'm also kind of including Iyashikei into here, and for those of you that don't know, Iyashikei is a Japanese genre that just means feel good. It's about shows that just make you feel happy and fluttery inside because they're so cute and they're so genuine and there's no ulterior motive. It's just cute people, nice people doing cute, nice things. And I really enjoy that. Maybe that's because the last 2.5 years have kind of been a little bit of a hellscape for everyone. So I've just fallen into this idea that these really adorable shows are going to make me feel a lot better. I also did not include Gintama on this section of the list, and my reasoning for that is that Gintama is a really interesting manga to read. However, Gintama also likes to seed in a ton of references to other famous manga and famous moments in manga and anime, and it's honestly a disservice that you do to yourself by reading it if you're not already into anime and manga, because you're going to miss a lot of the references and jokes. So with that being said, we'll start with Gugure Kokuri-chan, which is about a little girl who lives alone, and she plays this Ouija board game, basically, and she accidentally summons a fox spirit who notices the way she's living and decides that she needs a parental guardian in her life. And she absolutely does not want this. She just wants to keep living on her own and eating ramen and going to school. And ramen's pretty much all she eats. And then hijinks ensue. There's lightsaber battles. It's really funny to watch. The next one is Sweetness and Lightning, which falls a little bit more along the lines of an Iyashikei, but it's about a man and his daughter and their experiences with this high school student and the family getting together to cook food and go to festivals and just do fun things to enrich everyone's lives. The next is a short comedy series. Haven't you heard? I'm Sakamoto. It's only 4 volumes. It is available in English in the US. It's sold at Barnes & Nobles. It is absolutely wonderful. It's about this character who's perfectly perfect in every way, and everyone in the story makes it their job in life to try to catch this character off guard and get him. And every single time he comes out of it scot-free, perfect, in the funniest ways ever. So 10 out of 10. Spy X Family is my next recommendation. Once again, you can buy it at Barnes & Nobles. You can find it online. It's very popular right now. I'm not going to talk that much about it because I don't want to spoil it, because the anime just released. The first episode's out now. 10 out of 10. Go check it out. It's the cutest, most amazing story. I was actually recommended it by a friend. Didn't intend to originally read it. I'm very glad I did. And then my final 2 are How to Keep a Mummy, which is just a cute Iyashikei. This dude, his dad sends him a little tiny mummy in this giant sarcophagus, and he has to figure out how to keep it. You know, how to keep it alive and that kind of thing, because it's still alive. And then Isekai, Izakaya, and Nobu. This is the only one I keep in paper out of this section of the list, and I do only have the first volume because they are quite expensive. but I did read it online originally. It does have an anime. The anime episodes are relatively short. The anime is finished. And this is just about this izakaya, which is a Japanese food place, that the back door opens into our world, and the front of the store front, opens into this fantasy world. And it's just these workers from our world dealing with these people from this fantasy world who come to this place that they've never seen or heard of the food or the drinks, but they really, really enjoy it, and it just becomes this great family environment. So, moving on from comedy, I did want to touch on Magical Girl, because Magical Girl mangas are very popular and very common, especially in the Japanese markets. I haven't read that many myself. It's not typically a genre I read, but I will say Sailor Moon is quite good. You can read the originals, which you can find usually online. Plenty of people have done fan translations. You could probably also find a lot of them used, since it was pretty popular in the US, although it is no longer being published in the original run, because Sailor Moon Crystal, which is a rewrite of a lot of the series, came out. That they do carry at Barnes & Nobles, as well as several other modern spin-offs. So, Sailor Moon, really good place to start if you're into magical girl shows. My other recommendation is Flying Witch, which is kind of an Iyashikei, but it's about a girl who has the powers of a witch. 10 out of 10, highly recommend. Honestly, this entire video is just things that I think are 10 out of 10 anyways, so I'm never going to say that they're not good. They're all my personal favorites, as well as ones that I think are just genuinely good. So, moving on to the final category, which is Shounen. So we talked about Shoujo, which is girls manga targeted at the demographic of girls from the ages of 10 to 18. Shounen is targeted at boys ages 10 to 18. So typically, Shounen includes a quest, epic battle or fight scenes, a lot more fighting, epic bromances, that kind of thing. And I'm a huge Shounen fan. Like, Shounen is the first genre I got into. I've read a lot of the major Shounen. This was another category for me that was absolutely massacred by Nick Knack when I gave him my original list. It had like 60 series on it, and that was just unattainable. So we're going to start with a couple that I do not have here in paper, but Beelzebub, which is this story about this delinquent in high school who gets this baby that is Beelzebub, the prince of hell, dropped on him, and the baby's tethered to him, and he basically has to take care of this baby, and he really doesn't want to, but every time the baby gets upset, the baby shocks him with lightning because it's Beelzebub, the demon, and he has to raise it to be like the perfect demon king of hell. So that's absolutely hilarious. It's also one of my comfort manga and comfort animes, and I do tend to both read it and watch it at least once every 3 to 4 months, because I really enjoy it that much. It's not really published in the US anymore in paper. You will have to find copies of it online, but it is relatively easy to find online. The anime is available on Verve. The other one in this sort of category that's just a really fun and hilarious read is Kenichi, History's Mightiest Disciple, which is about a boy who becomes part of this martial arts dojo, but the martial arts dojo has 9 or 10 different people in it. Each one is proficient in a different martial arts style. And so it details him learning about these different people and their fighting styles and trying to further his own. The next one is possibly one of the most iconic shonens of all time, but it is Dragon Ball, the original series, and Z. So I'm specifying the original series and Z because I personally think that they are the best of the manga. I also think they're the best of the anime. I have opinions on later entries into the Dragon Ball franchise, but the original Dragon Ball, which started as a parody of Journey to the West and The Monkey King, and is really amazing because of that, is stunning, about a little boy Goku journeying to find the Dragon Balls and that kind of thing. And Z, I felt, was a really good continuation. And in the original release in Japan, Dragon Ball and Z were part of the same manga run. They were unbroken. They were split in the animes because of, there's a big time skip between the end of Dragon Ball and the start of Z, technically. So in the English publication, they were separated. Now, this is another one. I don't have the individual volumes. I have a couple of the 3-in-1s. You can get the 3-in-1s at Barnes & Nobles. I don't know if the original series are still being published into English, but this is absolutely easy to find online. The next one is One Piece. If anyone's been on the channel, seen any of the videos, I worship at the altar of One Piece. One Piece is the first big series I got into after Naruto, which was the first anime series I ever watched. I stay caught up every chapter, every episode. I absolutely love it. I have 70 volumes of it. I bought most of them half price or really, really cheap from a friend who really hated the series and got out of it eventually. But I adore it with every bone in me. Oda is continually amazing. Even the smallest things that he mentions in the first 10 volumes can be brought back as major important plot points in volume 90. His storytelling is stunning. He's a master world builder, and it's just this beautiful world to be experiencing, and he's so creative, and there's such attention to detail that honestly, you could reread this series, just restart at the beginning every time you finish it, and you will find something new every single time. It's stunning. Now, I know that the length is intimidating, but the way I look at it is that One Piece is split up into sagas. You can find the lengths and definitions of where the sagas start and end, but really, if you look at One Piece, kind of like Dragon Ball, where you have Dragon Ball, Z, GT, Super, I know GT is not canon, but it still existed, Super, and so on. You kind of look at it like that. Like, it's all part of one storyline, it's just split up into separate anime series. I kind of tend to watch the sagas in chunks. Like, I'll sit down and I'll tell myself, okay, I'm gonna watch East Blue this month. Next month I'll watch Alabasta, then I'll take a break, and then I'll watch whatever the next saga is. And so that's how I kind of rationalize it, but at the same time, it is well worth the time and effort if you just dive right into it. I highly recommend. I cannot praise this series enough. The next is my most recent entry, probably, Jujutsu Kaisen. I love Jujutsu Kaisen. I did actually watch the anime first for Jujutsu Kaisen, which is not the case with any of the rest of these. But I've really found that while the anime I felt was stunning, the manga is infinitely better. I think the manga is incredibly well written, the art is beautiful, the story is compelling. I would highly recommend it. The outlier in this group, before I get to my last suggestion, is Ghost in the Shell. I was originally going to have a mecha section to this video, but I couldn't really think of a lot of mechas that I genuinely enjoyed the manga of, so I'm recommending Ghost in the Shell because I find that the Ghost in the Shell manga is really enjoyable to read. It has some stunning movies based on it, and I think it's just a really good introduction to the kind of dystopian, futuristic things that manga often gets into. My final book in this video is perhaps the one that I'm most sure belongs in this video. So my goal in this video was to recommend series that I genuinely think are good series for either beginning readers or people who just want to kind of go back and read series that maybe they didn't get a chance to read because they avoided them or they watched them instead. But this last series I think is an absolute masterpiece and classic, and it is Full Metal Alchemist. Now, say what you will about the animes, Brotherhood was stunning. The original Full Metal Alchemist, even though it had a completely uncanon ending to the manga, still stunning. The movie's really good. We don't talk about the live action movies, that's not a thing, it didn't happen. But the original manga is, in my opinion, the best manga I've ever read. It's relatively contained, not too long a story. The art is stunning. There's just the right balance between comedy, politics, and far more serious topics. I had never bought the books before now. I bought them for a class I'm currently taking. But reading through this first book and seeing where it ends and what was included in it and the timing in it, which reading it in book format is a little bit different than reading it online, because reading it online you just can read through the chapters without stopping. Here I had to stop at the end of the book, and this first book is stunning. It's got an absolute gut-wrenching beginning, a comedic middle, a meaningful ending that definitely hints at a lot more going on. If you take away any series from this video that you have not read yet or have not watched, this is the one to take. This is my 100 out of 10. Now, with that being said, obviously, biased video. You're not going to see a lot of names on here that you might have known. You know, I haven't read Attack on Titan. There's a lot of big series I have read that I felt just didn't necessarily belong on this list, since it was a more personal list, because I do have series that I genuinely think are good, even though I didn't enjoy them myself because of subject matter or something like that. I also didn't include light novels, web novels, or web comics, or anything that was anime original, because otherwise Puella would have made this list right up there with Fullmetal Alchemist. So more videos will be coming in the future that are either specific to genre or medium of writing, but for now, in my opinion, these are some of the best places that you can start in manga currently, especially if you're reading in English in the US. So let me know if you like this video. Let me know if you've read any of these series. I do want to know if you agree or disagree. I think it would be really interesting to see what other people feel about some of the series I've chosen. I know that some of them are going to be controversial. Not a lot of other people like Prince of Tennis. There's a reason why I refrained from putting Get Backers on this list, even though I personally think that it actually does belong right up there with Fullmetal Alchemist. So let me know in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.